at this hour will go far
We
beyond,
got
this hour for sure. We said we are going to start at 12:05, so we have a couple minutes.
2 more
Doug,
minutes.
today.
I did start the recording, so we know we're set for that.
Okay, how you doing, Doug?
Oh,
Morning.
Okay,
Good afternoon.
good afternoon. Well, let me go ahead and just welcome everyone uh, to our Lunch and Learn, our April Lunch and Learn. We are certainly glad that you were able to join us, those who are on now and those who will join us in the future. I wanted to start by sharing the Orange County Chamber of Commerce values on diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. The Orange County Chamber of Commerce is committed to promoting the values and benefits of diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion in our county. We believe every community member deserves the opportunity to enjoy the benefits of a strong economic environment and a vibrant quality of life. We believe that celebrating diversity, championing equity, and cultivating inclusion with dignity and civility is critical to the economic vitality and overall health of Orange County and the entire Hudson Valley region. And in the spirit of that statement, we present today our Lunch and Learn on neurodiversity in the workplace. And I'm going to stop here. My name is Earl Miller. I'm the chairman of our DEAI committee. But I'd like to introduce Holly, who is our secretary and the person, one of the people responsible for our guests joining us today. So, Holly, would you introduce our guest?
Absolutely. So I'm very excited to be presenting Meredith Teakin, and she is currently the president of the International Board of Credentialing and Continuing Education Standards. They're the ones really that were brought in to help make Legoland a sensory-friendly environment locally, and they've done work all over the nation, and they continue to be doing work. Meredith brings a wealth of experience cultivated over years of dedicated service in healthcare, marketing, professional development, and the nonprofit sector. Her commitment to making a positive impact on the lives of neurodivergent individuals and those with disabilities led her to join the team at IBCCES, where she plays a pivotal role in advancing its mission to support and empower professionals in healthcare, education, hospitality, tourism, public safety, and corporate sectors. And beyond her executive role, she's a very passionate advocate who has shared the need and impacts of the IBCCES's work on a global stage at numerous industry conferences and summits. Meredith's commitment to fostering positive change aims at creating environments where absolutely everyone can thrive, enhancing accessibility and the quality of life for all community members.
Thank you for that introduction, Holly. I do have some slides to share with the group, and I'm happy to take questions afterwards. So let's go ahead and jump in. Just a thumbs up, screen looks good. Everybody can see what I'm doing. Okay, perfect. So we're talking about neurodiversity, obviously being, talking with the chamber, we're going to focus on the workplace, but this is information and really a mindset that can and should be implemented in all aspects, whether that's working with customers or end users, coworkers, teams that you manage, as well as just in our day-to-day lives. But we're going to focus on the workplace primarily. So like Holly mentioned, I just wanted to briefly explain IBCCS is an independent credentialing body. So we've been around since 2001, and we've always had a mission of providing professional supports, training, and education and certification to those that are serving individuals that are autistic or neurodivergent or have other needs. And we're a global organization. We have certificates in over 100 countries, but we are based here in the US. I'm actually based in Florida. But we also have a small office in Dubai. We're doing a lot of work in the Middle East and now also expanding a lot to Asia. So neurodiversity and accessibility and all of these things are a huge topic of interest and a huge focus for organizations all over the globe. And we're happy to be able to provide those supports. Like Holly mentioned, we do work a lot with attractions, hotels, resorts, theme parks, but we also really provide programs for every single setting. And all of our programs are tailored to the setting, right? So somebody that's focusing on hiring and working better with their neurodivergent employees, that's going to be a different type of program that we provide versus somebody that is a law enforcement officer or somebody that works in a healthcare setting, et cetera, et cetera. Everything we do is tailored to the person's role and the setting that they're providing those services in. And we always include the lived experience of neurodivergent or autistic individuals in our training and in our programming, along with other clinical and subject matter experts. So our whole goal is to provide well-rounded programs. So that's what we do. We do training and certification and other supports so that at the end of the day, we can all benefit. But I wanted to start with some just definitions and kind of setting the lay of the land. There's a lot of terminology that's being used that maybe people have different definitions for, different experience levels with. So I did just want to kind of talk through a little bit of that before we jump in. So when we're talking about all of these things, we want to make sure that we're remembering we have internal and external audiences that are going to be impacted or have these, have these different neurotypes or different needs and abilities. And so when I say internal, that's employees, coworkers, managers, leaders, people that work for us on an internal basis as an organization. And then external would obviously be clients, the community at large, the customer base in general. But statistically, neurodiversity and disabilities obviously have no boundaries as far as socioeconomics, class or status, race, gender, all of that. And there is a lot of, I would say, intersectionality amongst all of those things. So for neurodiversity, autism, and things that are under the neurodivergent umbrella, that is typically going to be considered usually something that's an invisible disability. So unlike somebody that might use a wheelchair or have some other kind of physical difference, cognitive differences or neurodiversity in particular, that's going to be something that's not going to be obvious to observation, right? And we don't want to make assumptions about people, but we also need to remember that it literally could be anybody, especially when it comes to autism and some of these other neurodivergent characteristics. We do typically tend to think of a certain kind of person as being on the spectrum or having those needs, but we know that that's just really not the case, right? There's reasons why in the past, for example, more boys were diagnosed with autism and ADHD than girls were, but that doesn't mean that girls aren't on the spectrum or aren't neurodivergent. That just means that we know that there were some biases and some differences in the way that we were providing those diagnoses. When we talk about the autism spectrum specifically, autism is one piece of neurodiversity. It's obviously very common and one of the ones that is frequently discussed, but autism as a spectrum is not linear. When we think of somebody's abilities and strengths and challenges, it's not something that IBCCS would recommend anybody think of as far as low or high functioning or a low or high end. That is sometimes verbiage that is used, but we don't recommend that because even somebody that is that has lower support needs, that might be more independent, that might be able to navigate the world very similar to a typical person, seemingly. There is a lot of masking that goes along with that. There's a lot of work and effort that those individuals put into their day-to-day lives. We have, for example, a board member who's autistic and he is a professional speaker. He travels all over the world sharing his story, being paid to do speaking engagements, writing books. He cannot ride a bicycle and he has trouble buttoning his shirt sometimes, but you would never know that when you meet him, right? So again, we need to kind of break down these ideas of low and high and kind of just what it looks like to be on the spectrum or to be neurodivergent. When we look at neurodiversity, that's the bigger umbrella, which we're going to dive into a little bit later. But that's simply just the idea that brain differences exist. It's the idea that just because your brain works differently than maybe the typical idea of somebody, that doesn't mean that it's inherently bad or wrong. That just means that your brain functions differently, and diversity within the neurotypes within our population has always existed. And it's something that is just, you know, it exists whether we want to believe it or not. But the more recent kind of focus on neurodiversity, especially in the workplace, is coming from a better understanding of what that looks like, and a better understanding even on the clinical side of what some of these diagnoses actually mean, and what are some ways we can help support these individuals to make sure that we are being inclusive. And that's not only the right thing to do. Accessibility and inclusion is obviously the right thing to do, but there is also a business benefit to doing so. And it's really imperative for an organization that wants to stay relevant and attract and retain the best talent to be focusing on things like accessibility, because it impacts so many people. But neurodiversity is just brain diversity. Lots of people's brains work in different ways, and that doesn't inherently mean that there's something wrong with them. It just means we need to understand that we all have differences, right? We're all individual humans at the end of the day, but there are some commonalities and things that we can be aware of. And then, of course, this should be part of your conversations around accessibility, inclusion, and diversity as well. Neurodiversity should be part of your DEI programming and your DEI considerations. And again, there's a lot of intersectionality. People might have multiple disabilities or multiple intersectional identities as well. So just be aware of that. And I'm really happy to be talking about this today. So when we're talking about terminology, just a little bit of an FYI, typically best practices, and these things do evolve over time, but neurodiversity is the concept of brain diversity, the fact that people's brains work differently, and that's okay. We should be accepting these as just things to be aware of and not necessarily something inherently negative. Folks that are neurodivergent do have challenges that they might need to face or obstacles to overcome. But again, they also have lots of talents and skills that we can really benefit from as an employer or as a society. When we're talking about a group of people, we can say like your organization is neurodiverse. You have a diversity of brain types within your organization. But when we're referring to individuals, we don't say an individual is neurodiverse. We say that that individual is neurodivergent. And then the kind of companion to that, if you're not neurodivergent, you would be considered neurotypical. And, you know, again, there is some, I think, just best practice as far as the prevalence of these diagnoses and being the neurodiversity umbrella is quite large, and there are a lot of people that are impacted by this. We do have a rising rate of diagnoses for a lot of this, but everybody is not autistic. Everybody does not have ADHD. You know, we do want to be careful and cautious with how we label things, but certainly a lot of folks do fit those criteria. But I myself, for example, identify as being neurotypical, but I do have some sensory sensitivities and other, you know, maybe strong preferences and needs. So when we look at why are we talking about this, and you, if you're listening to this, you yourself might be neurodivergent, so you get it. But we do want to understand that there are so many folks that are impacted by this. 1 in 6 people have a sensory need or sensitivity that could be due to being neurodivergent, being autistic, having another kind of disability or diagnosis. It could be somebody with PTSD. It could be somebody with anxiety. So when we look at some of the accommodations and things to be aware of from a sensory perspective, that's going to be really helpful for neurodiversity in the workplace. Just realize that it goes even beyond that. 1 in 6 people have those sensitivities or needs. When we look at the rate of dyslexia or learning differences, that is also part of the neurodiversity umbrella. 1 in 5 Americans have dyslexia or a related learning difference. So this is not, again, a small piece of the population that we're talking about. 1 in 10 adults have an attention disorder, ADHD, or something related. So again, when we're looking at our workforce, whether that person comes in with a diagnosis or not, or whether that person comes in and raises their hand and says, I have ADHD, we need to know that 1 in 10 of our employees are likely to be neurodivergent, or 1 in 5, or whatever the case may be. So we as an organization and we as managers need to be proactive about providing the best workplace for these folks so that at the end of the day, we can get the most out of our staff and our talent and have the best results. When it comes to autism, 1 in 36 kids are currently diagnosed with autism in the US. That's the CDC number. That is just what the CDC tracks. It varies by region. And it also is very conservative. There's millions of adults that are autistic that never got a diagnosis, that basically were misdiagnosed or misunderstood, flew under the radar, or there might be factors such as not having the financial capability to pursue a diagnosis. Even as a child, your family may not be able to access that. In a lot of places, there's up to a 2-year waiting period just to get a diagnosis from a doctor. So there's a lot of barriers to getting an official diagnosis. There is a big focus on early intervention now in the US. And again, these numbers really are global, but these are coming specifically from US organizations. So again, autistic kids turn into autistic adults. It doesn't go away. Adults that might have learned some tools and strategies to be able to navigate their lives easier. That doesn't mean they're not still on the spectrum, right? It's not something that you just turn off and on or that goes away. So again, sometimes folks are surprised by these numbers. It impacts so many people that we encounter day to day and in our personal lives as well. So why, again, as a workplace, would we be focusing on this? Everybody wants to find the best talent, to make sure that we retain the talent that we have, to make sure that we're managing our teams effectively. And this is really why an organization should be focusing on neurodiversity. It's not just the right thing to do. It's not just something nice to have. This is really something that organizations need to start doing in order to stay competitive. We know, based on the limited data that's available from organizations that have been focusing on this for a long time, this is typically larger companies that have had a focus on this since definitely pre-pandemic, that they have a great retention rate with their neurodivergent team members that work with them. They're more likely to be innovative. Some individuals might struggle with change in their day-to-day routine, but a lot of neurodivergent individuals are very creative, are very outside the box thinkers. They're great at problem solving. They have a high level of loyalty because unfortunately, most neurodivergent or autistic individuals are underemployed or unemployed. So they might not be the best when it comes to getting through an interview process, but once they're in the organization and utilized to their full potential, can be very great, loyal, successful employees. So that is why, again, there's a business benefit to that. So when we're looking at what can we do as an organization, what can we do from a workplace perspective, most of these things that we're going to talk about, and I'm just going to go with the basics, but you can dive in deeper. IBCCS does offer training and certification related to this. But when we're talking about accommodations, there might be folks with disabilities that, again, are using a wheelchair, have mobility concerns or mobility needs. They might have other kinds of disabilities. There are, physical things that need to be done in order to help them achieve their role or be successful, which is great. And those things should be done. But a lot of times when we're talking about neurodiversity in particular in the workplace, a lot of these things are low cost or no cost, but it takes effort and understanding from an organizational standpoint on a process basis or a procedure basis, and really on a management communication style basis. So these aren't like a business has to build a whole new building to hire neurodivergent people, right? That's not really what we want. What we want to do is just kind of think ahead and be proactive and make sure we're offering flexibility and offering some of these things, and we have the knowledge to work with individuals. Within neurodiversity, there are a lot of commonalities, but each individual is different. They're going to have different needs or strengths or challenges or sensitivities. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. But if I were to recommend some things a business could do to get started to be more inclusive, training is obviously important. IBCCS, of course, offers that. So I'm a little bit biased as far as that goes. But getting that information to your teams is important, not just for HR. This is not something that we want to have one person that's in an HR role or an HR department that's doing the initial hiring to be experts, and then nobody else is knowledgeable. Because what we see when folks are trying to be inclusive, we don't want to just open up the interview process What happens when that employee is onboarded? What happens when they're in their day-to-day experience with their manager, their coworkers? We don't want to set them up for something that's not going to work out. And so it's important that your managers, your leaders, your line level employees, HR as well, everybody has some basic understanding and knowledge about neurodiversity. And again, we're talking about ADHD, dyslexia, learning differences, autism, sensory needs, those types of things. Sometimes some folks will also include things like OCD, Tourette's, other mental health conditions under the neurodiversity umbrella as well, which can be part of that. But I would encourage you to think about, this is an easy way that I like to think about it, is the workplace was built for a certain kind of person to succeed. And a really easy way to think about this, I don't know who is an extrovert or an introvert in this conversation, but I know that as an extrovert, the workplace was built for me to succeed. I can be thrown into a meeting and asked my opinion, and I'm very good at doing that off the cuff. I can come up with ideas, I can brainstorm, I can speak up, I can advocate for myself. I don't mind being on camera. I don't mind doing presentations. And so a lot of the way the workplace was built was to reward extroverted behaviors. If you're an introvert or you have a loved one that's an introvert, that is not something that's easy for those introverts to do. So when you take an introverted person and you throw them in a meeting and say, brainstorm, here's this new information, give me a brilliant idea, go. They may not succeed in that setting. If you give it to them in written format, or you say, I want you to think about this for a day or two and then come back to me with your recommendations, they can come back with the most brilliant recommendations possible, but they needed time to process it. They needed time to think about it and mull it over. That is simply just a stylistic difference that we have not rewarded in the workplace for the most part. So think about neurodiversity in that way, not to minimize the actual diagnosis of being neurodivergent, but just to think about the ways that the workplace makes assumptions and the way that we have always done things the same way because it worked for us in the past. This is not the way we want to do business moving forward. So taking a fresh perspective. Why do we do interviews this way? Is it really critical that this person make eye contact with me in a job interview to do their job effectively? Or is that just a bias I have because I think that that's how somebody should behave, but is that really critical to their role, right? This is not about hiring people that are bad fits for certain roles. Every neurodivergent person is going to have different skills and experiences and challenges and strengths. So you still want to hire for the role that's appropriate based on what their strengths and abilities are. But we do a lot of things in the workplace just because that's the way we came up in the workplace, or that's what the standardized method is. And that's really not most beneficial. Is it really critical to do a 5-person group interview with a new hire? Or is that really just setting them up for a situation that's not only it's not realistic, it's not real life. It has nothing to do with them performing their job function. And neurodivergent individuals, we think of them as being good computer programmers or IT people, but you can be neurodivergent and be excellent presenting in front of people. You can be in marketing, you can be in sales, you can be in customer service, you can be in accounting. It can be any role in the company. It could be something where maybe the person is best suited for kind of an entry level, retail job, being a bagger at the grocery store, but it can be any role. It can be any type of organization. You already have neurodivergent folks working for you that are probably afraid to say something or not sure what accommodations they're going to have access to. And a lot of folks have had negative experiences in the workplace when they have shared their diagnosis or their situation being neurodivergent. And so they're hesitant to do that. And so they do their best to mask and try to fit in and try to get along. And then usually what happens is they get burnt out and they just don't end up staying in the job, or they don't perform to their best ability. So really taking a fresh perspective and questioning things is really the first step. You can certainly do research. There's lots of information online about accommodations in the workplace, but you can also ask your staff, if you're a small business, getting together with your staff and making them comfortable to share, maybe anonymously, or forming an employee resource group can be great. But there's a lot of low cost supports that you can implement. Note-taking type of technology. Zoom has it built in now where it'll take notes for your meeting and send a recap afterwards. setting agendas ahead of time, being clear and specific with your communication on expectations, things that we take for granted, social cues, social norms, things that people may or may not be able to pick up on when they join your organization, all of these type of soft skills. Being clear about what you expect from somebody is very important, specifically if they're neurodivergent, because they may not be working with the same set of assumptions that you are. Providing flexibility in the office space. Are they able to work from home? Do they have to have their camera on for meetings? Can they sit in a room and listen to headphones and turn the lights down because the bright lights are bothering and distracting them? All these things seem kind of minor, but can make a big difference in the workplace environment and they're being successful. And again, there's lots of tools and technology to help support follow-up. Individuals might not be great at receiving verbal instructions. It might be difficult for them to process things, you know, in an auditory way. So make sure you're writing things down when you're giving instructions or giving visual schedules. There's lots of little things you can do to be inclusive and to be accessible. And I would just say these are things that you should do for everybody all the time. We don't want to be in a situation where we're in a meeting and we're like, oh, Meredith's in this meeting. Let me turn on the note taker, right? We should just have that as the baseline for every meeting, because not only neurodivergent folks can benefit from that, but lots of other people can benefit from that. It makes everybody's lives easier. So begin with accessibility and offer these things, again, if it's low cost or tech, you know, AI tools, those things can help everybody. Not just neurodivergent folks, but you don't need to call it out. It needs to be something that's just part of the environment, so that they don't necessarily even have to unmask and share that diagnosis if they're not comfortable doing it. They can be successful in their job with a lot of these tools without necessarily ever knowing that. And then if they have specific needs, then you can open up that conversation. Building trust is really important because, like I mentioned, a lot of folks maybe have had negative experiences in the past. If individuals are struggling with a task or they're not performing to the standards that you've set, again, there's tools like visual schedules and thinking of different ways to communicate what you need and setting parameters around things that can help them succeed. Or it might just be a case where maybe their skills are mismatched to the role. We have a client who years ago was taking a certification and training program through us that was focused on autism and focused on guest service. So they were externally focused, but they had an employee who was a problematic employee that was basically about to be fired. He was on the maintenance crew and he was never following their uniform requirements and was hard to keep on task. And just the manager was very frustrated. And this manager had spoken to the individual. Every individual is not going to be able to advocate for themselves necessarily. And so the manager was like, yeah, I'm basically about to fire this person, but I need them to do one final task. They gave them a task to basically measure all of the paved areas in the facility so that they could order some materials to paint or seal the paved areas. This was a large resort, so there's quite a few areas. And they thought this would take them days to complete and it would keep them busy and out of their hair. Well, they came back within a few hours with the answer that was calculated precisely because they used technology, they used Google Maps and other tools to do it basically in a faster, more efficient way. And this really started the manager thinking, oh, maybe I've misjudged this person. Come to find out, the person was never wearing the proper uniform because he had sensory sensitivities, and it was a tight-fitting long-sleeve shirt that was causing a lot of distress and irritation. So they allowed him to wear a different uniform, and then they repurposed this individual who was about to be fired and put him in a position where he was analyzing their purchases and their purchasing department and doing analysis on sort of when and how and the quantities of what they should be ordering for all their supplies. And after a year, he saved their company $1 million. This was someone who was going to be fired. So it's not always the person that, he was not able to say, hey, here's my exact roadmap for how to be a good manager for me. And here's everything I need to be successful. He was not able to do that for himself, but the manager saw the opportunity and through the training was looking at things in a fresh way and was able to repurpose that employee into a role that was suited to his strengths. And he's a great success story. So again, when I say taking a fresh perspective, it's also looking at maybe this person isn't the right fit for this role, but could they be a good fit for some other type of role and what really is their strength? So that's management 101, but we need to come at it through a neurodiversity lens. So these are just some basic things to think about with accessibility. I'm going to leave it off with this cartoon if you can read it, hopefully. But when we talk about universal design and how being accessible helps everyone, this is kind of just an illustration of that principle. So if you can't read it, or, you know, if you need some assistance, this is a cartoon of school kids that are waiting to get into the school building, and there's somebody there shoveling snow because they're all waiting to get in, and there's a set of stairs and there's a ramp. And there's a kid that's in a wheelchair that says, could you please shovel the ramp? And the employee that's shoveling the snow said, all the other kids are waiting. They're going to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling the stairs, then I'll get to you. Then I'll get to the ramp. And then the kid using the wheelchair says, but if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in. The ramp is not just for me. We can all use the ramp. Why do I have to wait? Shovel the path that everybody can use. And that's the mindset we need to take to neurodiversity and accessibility in the workplace for all needs, is begin with accessibility, begin with the widest path and the easiest path for everyone, and then we can all succeed together. It's not something that you're giving somebody special privileges or something that they should really have to wait for in order to get these basic needs met. A lot of people can benefit from these things. So that's just kind of what I would encourage business owners to think about when they're looking at neurodiversity in the workplace in particular, and public spaces as well. So that's the end of the presentation. I'm happy to take questions. I have put my email here if anybody has specific needs or things that they want to take offline, but my email is meredith@ibcces.org. And thanks so much for having me.
Oh, I have a question.
Yes.
Hey, so thank you. That was really good. It was so good. If we just open our brains a little bit and listen to people, or we could do so much better. So what do we do like in the interview process? So we don't know that somebody may be neurodivergent and they may not interview very well. And a hiring manager is going to say, like you said, with the look, they don't make eye contact, so I don't want to hire them because they don't make eye contact. How do we educate, like, how do we help somebody that we don't, maybe the recruiter doesn't know that they have something, but so how do we educate and help people even get into a situation where they can succeed?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I think doing a comprehensive training program is important through a knowledgeable and legitimate source, such as IBCCS. But really, it's getting on the same page with your recruiters, your hiring managers, your interviewers, and setting the standard and saying, hey, this is maybe what we used to do. This is not what we're going to do moving forward. So you really need to review kind of if you have processes. I mean, I work with organizations where they'll instruct the interviewer to do or say certain things, like make a note about their body language. And it's like, no, let's not do that. Let's focus on these 3 things that they must have to be successful. This other stuff really is irrelevant, right? And sometimes just calling to mind people's biases. Obviously, the recruiter is not meaning to, or the interviewer, they're not purposefully being biased, but this is just the things that are in our head. So when those thoughts come up, if the individual has the information to know, I'm noticing their body language and maybe this is affecting my judgment, let me put this aside. They do have to kind of regulate themselves, but it's natural that those thoughts occur. What we need to do is not take action on those thoughts, right? So having everybody with the baseline understanding of what is critical to a job or an interview and what is not, maybe re-reviewing even the way that you do job postings, stating that you have accessible options, if it's a virtual interview, letting people know ahead of time, here's what we're going to discuss during the interview. Here's what we expect of you. You are able to have your camera on or off, or we expect you to have your camera on. Let people know that ahead of time. What are the protocols? Who are they going to be meeting with? What kind of questions are going to be brought up? Just because you tell somebody, you know, in the past, I think too, the interview process has kind of become sort of this game of like, who can perform an interview best, not really who's going to be the best person for the job, right?
Yeah.
So anything you can do that's maybe more hands-on or more of like you don't want to take up the person's whole day, but you know, you can look at examples of their work. You can do like a working interview. You can give them like a project. You can have them come in and, you know, anything you can do that's a little more tangible and less, I would say, sort of performative with the right answers is going to be helpful for folks that maybe don't shine in like an interview situation, but they can do the actual work. And then again, just communicating what to expect well in advance. If they know that the camera has to be on, then they're going to prepare for that interview very differently. Or if you can, allow people to turn the camera off or allow them to have time to prep their answers ahead of time. Because again, what are we really doing when we're interviewing? Everybody can Google general interview questions and how to trick the system. And you know what I mean? That's a very neurotypical kind of extroverted thing to do, is just perform for the interview. And then we've all had that situation where they get to the job and you're like, who is this person?
Right.
So taking some of those factors away and making it more focused on the core skills, I think is going to help a lot. And then again, just having conversations about what really is critical to the role. I would say too, when you're managing staff, this is a bit of a tangent briefly, but even when you're managing staff, we have certain expectations of people. Hey, everybody get on the call and share a fun fact about yourself, and then we're going to play a game. That's obviously an introvert's nightmare, but a lot of neurodivergent people just don't even understand the need for that kind of thing. And we've worked with companies in the past too that they have an employee that's really good at what they do. And so they try to sort of almost like force them into roles that they're not interested in. Like we had an incident where there was an employee that was really good at what they did. So they kept trying to groom them for like a management position. And the person was like, I don't want that though. I'm not interested in that. I want to do this only and be left alone. And they were sort of looking at almost as like a negative, like, this person doesn't want to move up. They're not a team player. Like, why is this person being resistant to this? This is weird. And when I said, well, maybe they just don't want to, they were like, oh, okay. I mean, it sounds silly, but it's just these little assumptions we make every day, all day. Now, maybe some people do want to move up. We don't want to discourage advancement, but I'm just saying, like, figure out what that person needs, really. Don't make assumptions.
Awesome. Thank you.
There was a question through the chat, resources or recommendations for the client and customer experience. Again, that's going to vary based on the setting. IBCCS does a lot of training and certification related to that. But again, in general, communication. I've never been to a business or a restaurant or a hotel or an attraction or a store. I've never been anywhere that communicated enough about what to expect from that on-site experience. Detailed information about the sensory environment, the processes, the protocols, the rules. What am I, when I walk up to the front counter, what am I supposed to say? Even for people who navigate the world relatively easily, like I'll give an example myself. I travel a lot for what I do for work. I recently was in an airport nearby. We were doing an on-site visit because they're certified by us and we're looking for ways to make them more accessible. And I walked into the airport and I fly like every other month somewhere. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. The layout was confusing. The information desk was hidden. It was laid out unlike any other airport I've ever even been in. It was crowded, it was busy, it was overwhelming, it was bright. And I'm neurotypical and I travel a lot. And I was just like, whoa, I don't know what is going on here. Where would I go with my family if I was traveling just for fun or trying to navigate this space? There's no signage, you can't see anything. Where's the instructions? I didn't get an email. So anyway, all that to say, communication is key first and foremost. Video walkthroughs like 3D videos or 360 videos and photos are really helpful usually for folks, especially that have sensory needs or disabilities. Knowing that your bathroom is accessible does not help me. Saying bathroom is accessible, that means nothing to me. How big is it? What's the turnaround? Are there handrails? Like every person who uses a wheelchair doesn't have the same needs even, right? So like communicating visually and in written format, what to expect, what the processes are on a menu. If somebody could please put the detailed nutrition information somewhere that's easy to find. A lot of people with disabilities and a lot of neurodivergent people have very specific dietary needs, restrictions, or, specific things that they have to stick by. And, even in the year 2024, where you think, oh, everybody's gluten-free and everybody's this and that, tell you, nobody's still putting that on the menu to a satisfactory level. So I always say start with communication, because even if you're not changing the experience to be more accessible, the first step is just letting people know what to expect in the first place, right? So then they can figure out what their needs are or what adjustments need to be made. How is this bit of a soapbox? I could go on about that.
Quick question, and I guess not so quick answer. What's a good way to get people to care about this? Because and I'm not necessarily speaking for anyone I know, just kind of something I've experienced other places where people are like, yeah, HR handles that. There's this one person and we say we're open and welcoming, so we are, and that's it. We're done.
Yeah. I mean, I always try to approach it. I mean, IBCCS does this all the time. That's why we do try to talk about the business impacts, the business needs, the business benefits, or whatever it might be, right? Because this touches all aspects. If you're talking to somebody in marketing, this is a marketing opportunity. This is a community engagement PR opportunity. If you're talking to somebody in operations, this is an operational opportunity. This is a management effectiveness mandate. You are not a good manager if you do not understand neurodiversity, right? Like just point blank, period. If you want your customers, if you want more customers to come to you, if you would like to attract 1 in 6 people, then you should be doing these things. So you can tie it to a business objective, you can tie it to that person's particular role. It's not to say that obviously, like I said in the beginning, it is the right thing to do. Of course, we know this, but from a business perspective, I always try to speak to the benefits there. Do you want to reduce employee turnover and increase retention? Neurodiversity, accessibility. Do you want to hire better people? Inclusion, neurodiversity, accessibility. Do you want to have more customers? Do you want to increase your market share because your competitors are not accessible? Accessibility, right? So there's all these things that tie into every aspect of business, no matter what the setting is.
Meredith, this has been an amazing, it was everything we expected and more, especially given the short amount of time that you've had to share with us. Over the past few months of learning more about neurodiversity as we're preparing for today, I've realized that it's changed me. And I was in a supermarket weeks ago, and I heard from the other side, almost the other side of the store, the screaming. And the first thought was, oh, there's a bratty kid, acting out. But as I listened closely, I realized it was really a form of communication. And again, just becoming more aware of neurodiversity, as I got closer, I was right. It was a young man who was with, I guess, his mother, maybe. And they were really sort of exchanging. It was really a form of communication. It wasn't what I thought it was. And at least in my mind, I could see people with that understanding going from a frown to a smile of appreciation and support. So I think in many ways, it not only helps us in the workplace, but as members of community, and it helps us to become more refined as human beings. Can you talk a little bit about that, and maybe some tools or exercises that are used in training to help participants become more aware and sensitive to others in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, so like from a general public perspective, like what you experienced is very common. That's why a lot of folks that are neurodivergent or have kids that have disabilities or are on the spectrum, they really struggle just going to the grocery store, going out in public, because they might get overwhelmed. They might have some needs that need to be met or challenges. And instead of being met with understanding and grace, they're met with like, why is your kid throwing a tantrum in the middle of the store? Or like, the stares and the looks. There's a lot of stigma. And again, there are individuals that are neurodivergent, that are autistic, that might need round the clock care. They might have other disabilities. They might have an intellectual disability. Like there are challenges. They might get so overwhelmed that they hurt themselves. I mean, so there are some more serious cases where folks do need a lot more support. but especially on the side of just being more understanding and accepting. I think education is key, knowledge is power. I think a lot of people nowadays, like we've all heard of autism, like there's the TV shows and The Good Doctor and all these kind of more stereotypical presentations of what it looks like to be on the spectrum or to be neurodivergent. And what we really need to understand is it's so much more complex than that. And human beings aren't always the best at grasping, complex ideas. But one of the exercises that I like to do just to kind of open the conversation about neurodiversity in particular is most people, again, they're not trying to be exclusive. They're just unaware. They've got kind of that tunnel vision and they assume that their experience is fact and that that is what everyone's experience is. And we see this with other areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion as well, of course, right? So we need to, sometimes we got to ease people into it. But one kind of fun thing I do like to do is, and we could do it here on the call. If everybody on the call would picture a bird in their mind, take a second and envision it colored, picture a bird. Everybody got a bird? How many people thought of a penguin? One person. Of course, Holly did. Usually when we do this exercise, almost nobody says that, right? Everybody thinks of kind of like a random, like a sparrow or something. Anyway, is a penguin a bird? Yes, it is. Is Holly's answer wrong? No. Did anyone else think of that? No. So just opening up our minds to oh, that's not a wrong answer. That's just a different answer. She arrived at that answer differently. I did that exercise at a Florida tourism conference and I had 2 people say they thought of a flamingo, which I was like, yeah, of course we did. But it's so just opening the fact that this person might be difficult to work with because we're not giving them the tools that they need, or this person might be interacting with you differently than you would prefer or than you're used to. But that doesn't mean that that's wrong. We're all human beings. Let's try to meet in the middle, right? So once people's eyes are opened, kind of like that cartoon where it's like we can all benefit, I think just breaking down that barrier of the tunnel vision really is helpful, because then at the end of the day, most people want to do the right thing. They just don't know what that is or how to do the right thing. They don't know the gaps in their own knowledge until it's presented to them. So I think that I would say that's just the biggest thing. And then you can go into specific strategies or techniques or whatever. But like in the grocery store, if you see a mom or a dad struggling with a child that looks like they might be having a meltdown or is overwhelmed or whatever, sometimes just saying, hey, I'm here to help you if you need it. You're doing great. And they might say, great, thanks, I got it, go away. But just to have that support usually makes such a big difference, rather than people just being and kind of othering them. So just feeling comfortable enough to say, hey, we're all human, man. We all have bad days. We all have different challenges and needs. Let's just remember that people think differently than ourselves. Again, as an extrovert, sometimes that's difficult to remember if you're not self-aware. When you're working with an introvert, that can be very overwhelming, and you're not going to get what you want from that introvert unless you work with them and not against them. It's kind of the same idea in my mind.
That's great.
Anything else?
Excellent presentation. Thank you.
Just a quick question.
Thank you for having me.
If you could just say something very quick about what masking is, just in case there's people out there that aren't as aware of what masking is, and just any way to help put people at ease a little bit, and also that masking is okay, and that's just how a lot of people cope and get by with day-to-day life.
Sure. So masking is the idea that somebody that's neurodivergent, or really, again, I'm very sensitive to this because my husband is a classic introvert and I'm a classic extrovert, really, in that case. So I'm very sensitive to introverts. But masking is really just the behavior of working really hard to fit in or to meet social norms or to perform in a specific way that's expected of you that is kind of against your nature, right? So an extrovert might go to the office and be super outgoing. And then when they go home at night, they are exhausted. You know, this goes along with if you're neurodivergent and you're trying not, you know, you're trying to perform well, you're at work, you're not necessarily wanting people to know that you need, you know, autistic individuals or other neurodivergent folks might find it helpful to stem. So they might have some physical manifestations or vocal manifestations that help soothe them or that help them think or whatever. We all know the classic, somebody that just their knee never stops jittering, right? Or they might do other types of behaviors that some people in the past have told them like, hey, stop doing that. That's weird. What are you doing? So they're holding all that energy in, or they're over communicating. They're focused on, okay, I'm not going to be anxious. I got to speak in front of the group. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Whatever the case may be. When they get home at night, they are exhausted. They are overwhelmed. They cannot function because they spent all their energy that day masking kind of their true nature, right? So we all do this to some extent. Again, an introvert might mask their introverted qualities to be successful in their job and then come home and be like, I need to recharge. But for especially neurodivergent individuals, it can take a toll on their mental health. It can create more anxiety, more depression because they're not able to be themselves. They're afraid of if they do certain things, they're going to be judged, or maybe there could be negative consequences related to their job. If they say, hey, it would actually be really helpful if I didn't have to handwrite the notes for every meeting or type them out, because then I'm not able to pay attention and I'm like struggling to comprehend and whatever, but they're scared to do that. So they're like working extra hard just to perform tasks. So anyway, so that's generally what masking is related to. And again, a little bit of masking, if people are able to do it or they're willing to do it, then that's fine. But I would say the biggest thing you can do as far as having people not have to mask or maybe feel comfortable sharing some of these needs that they might have is, again, that approach to being accessible from the beginning. So I don't have to have somebody unmask to say, hey, I have ADHD and it would really be helpful if you could get an AI note taker because I just can't keep up with these notes. Instead of having to have them be vulnerable and open themselves up to do that, just provide it as standard practice for every meeting. So then you're alleviating that pressure from them, right? It's the same again with other identities. I don't need somebody on my team to tell me that going into a meeting, if I put a meeting on their calendar as their boss and I say important discussion, do you think that employee is going to be anxious and scared to have that meeting? Absolutely, they will be. If I put a meeting on the calendar that says discuss presentation XYZ, and then in the invite, I put an agenda with details ahead of time, that meeting is going to go so much better. I'm going to get what I need out of that employee. That employee is not going to have to be so anxious and freak out about what are we talking about? What to expect? What do I do? So it's alleviating that mental burden in a lot of cases. And again, as a boss, I don't need the person to even tell me that they have ADHD. I don't want to pressure them to be like, everybody, tell me what your neurotype is. You know, we really don't need that. But we just want to foster an environment of trust and security. So if somebody says, hey, it'd actually be really helpful if I can go in the office and turn the lights off for a couple hours because that's really hurting my eyes and I need to focus, and them know that they're not going to be judged for that and that accommodations can be made. So rolling out the welcome mat to say, this is welcome here. We want your input. We want your feedback. And here's the tools we're going to go ahead and provide to you from the start for everybody to have. The less you're othering people and making them stand out for these differences, that's really what inclusion is going to bring.
Well, are there any more questions or comments as we close?
Well, I just want to say thank you so much. I thought this was an outstanding presentation. It actually got me thinking, even my own staff in my own office. I'm like, wow, I never really saw it from that perspective. So I think that even myself need to look at things a little differently. And it was really, really helpful on so many levels. So on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, I want to thank you for providing us with this excellent presentation today.
My pleasure.
Yes, again, thank you, Meredith, and thank you all who joined us. And we look forward to seeing you at our next quarterly Lunch and Learn. until then, let's continue to grow as individuals, as businesses and community. Thank you.
Okay,
Have a good
thank
day.
you. Have a
Thank you.
wonderful day, everyone.